I'd like to introduce a person who's been instrumental in my recovery, and I certainly consider him a friend of mine. I hope he considers me a friend as well. Tom W. In case you don't know what this is, it's a mailile. It was reserved for ali'i, or chiefs in Hawaii, and it's very fragrant. So hope he can enjoy it while he's here. Thanks.
Yes, I'm delighted. Hi, my name is Tom, and I'm delighted to be here. And I'm just, I stay busy a lot and in my head a lot and distracted a lot, and it's wonderful to focus on civilization, like flowers around the neck and things in the garden and the waves and the beauty of Hawaii. And the beauty of the people here. I'm very grateful, and I have been spending the last few days not doing very much other than looking and tasting and breathing in deeply. And it's thanks. I wish well, I'm glad to be here today. That's what's true. What else can I tell you? This is an Al-Anon meeting, and I think Al-Anon is a sophisticated and subtle program, and sometimes I regard Al-Anon meetings as chemotherapy. I don't want to be there. I don't like anyone in the room. Go. And I find if I can sit there and breathe in the healing that's in the room, I'm better. I had to get sober first before I could find out my deep need for Al-Anon. And I'm of the opinion that a lot of people could use 100,000 Al-Anon meetings. And as quickly together as possible. Just to take the edge off. You know, this doesn't fix anybody, but it takes the edge off. And I occasionally had thought of anonymously sending Al-Anon literature to various national celebrities, and I haven't. I've been in Al-Anon for 20 or 25 years, and it's not just a subtle program. I think it's a very sophisticated program, and I think it takes time. This is my experience, and I'm happy to share my Al-Anon experience. I've learned from others. I've listened to some women and men in Al-Anon talk about being alive and doing this a day at a time and putting up with incredible circumstances. And when I'm in pain or uncomfortable, I'm a pretty willing student. And if I'm comfortable, I'd rather judge you. That's how it goes. Give you a little advice. I see my desire to give advice as a problem, not a solution. And I don't, when I'm in my right mind, I don't give a lot of advice, but I have given advice. Also, I want to report, I refer to myself as having a perfect Al-Anon program, and I hope you realize no one does, and I know that no one does, and I know I don't, but my arrogance indicates that I have a perfect Al-Anon program. So I find that soft humor, and as part of my perfect Al-Anon program today, I fed a few birds on the porch of this lovely hotel, and then I immediately thought I was St. Francis of Assisi. So that kind of stuff goes on in look how helpful I am, and I'm, visiting the birds. And then that was followed by a moment of darkness as I thought of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. And I then realized it was time to come for lunch, so I ran for my life. And that's a little vignette. You start being helpful, and suddenly there's 70,000 vultures in your bedroom. And how did that happen? And my impulse to be helpful is pretty deep inside of me. And in Al-Anon, I want to choose what to do with that desire to be helpful. Because a lot of times I'm not helpful. A lot of times I just get in the way. And that takes years and years and years to sort out. Just years to sort out. There's alcoholism in my home. We were pretty high-functioning alcoholics. No one went to jail, and people held down jobs, and people were involved in church and school, building committees, civil service, a lot of stuff. Very actively involved in the community, and I believe in that. I think that's a very good thing, and to the best of my ability, I'm involved in my community. I live in Oakland, California, and I do stuff there. I hang out there. I get involved in local things there, and I see that as a good thing. The alcoholism in my family we didn't talk about. We talked around. Denial happens in the family. Sometimes it's circumlocution. We use code words to describe things. And alcoholism was a code word. On the Swedish Lutheran Republican side of the family, we called alcoholics nervous people. And they would say things like, she sure is nervous, isn't she? Or when one of my cousins had DTs in a group, it was called his nervous spell. Remember his nervous spell? Or he hasn't been the same since his nervous spell, when he saw the rats coming out of the birthday cake. Could happen to anyone. It could happen to anyone. And on the Irish Catholic Democratic side of the family, we didn't call them alcoholics either. We called them characters. So we had characters and nervous people. And I was in recovery myself for a while before I was able to decode some of this stuff. And as an adult, look at my family and look at the alcoholism, diabetes, manic depression, people who disappeared, and see some kind of pattern going there. My mom called me once after I was in recovery for a while, and we didn't talk a lot about stuff. We talked around things. I mean, the weather is fine. People's health is fine. Politics were explosive. Religion was explosive. Keep it simple. And she just said, well, I'm very concerned about one of the neighbors. And I said, what's up? And she said, well, he parks his car on the lawn and then falls asleep next to it. And I said, does he drink? And she said, well, of course not, but he's very nervous. And so if my mother diagnosed you with a bad case of the nerves, I could translate that this was a falling down drunk who shouldn't be driving. That's how I interpreted that. Nervous spells. I had to learn about the family dynamics. I had to learn about the craziness. I had to learn about my own insides. And I knew nothing about me when I began my recovery. I had a lot of opinions, but I knew nothing about me. I preferred to stay busy and distracted. I'm a Catholic priest. I'm also a teacher. I wanted to be a high school teacher. Ever since I was a high school kid, I thought a high school teacher had a wonderful life, and it was a life of service, which I've always been attracted to, and I liked that. And I liked a lot of my teachers. I thought they were admirable people, and I wanted to follow in their example. And I did. I taught high school kids for 3 years drinking, and for 4 years sober. And my simple reflection is it's easier to teach them drinking. I think I could go back to the classroom now because I have some Al-Anon skills, but I didn't have any Al-Anon skills when I went back to the classroom. And I got involved in some very crazy patterns, and I want to be helpful. I want to be helpful. I want to be available, and I want to be helpful. A lot of adolescents look like alcoholics. Most of them grew out of it. But they sure look and act like alcoholics, and they would meet someone like me and just string us along for the ride. And we'd get used and abused and maltreated, and I'm helpful and maltreated and helpful and abused and helpful and stiffed and helpful and treated badly. And you do that for a while. I do that for a while, and I get mad. I guess I was teaching a room full of 15-year-olds. And I don't even know how you'd begin to train somebody to do that. But I was in a room with 15-year-olds. And one of them started the year as a pretty bright, perky kid. His name was Peter. And he was, he was 5 feet tall and weighed a pound. And he had goofy, curly hair. And he had a lovely sense of humor. And he laughed at my jokes, so I knew he was bright. And And I'll tell you, in the classroom, if you've got a kid or two who gets your humor, I mean, the classroom becomes a joy, and you can do things. And I looked forward to I looked forward to him being in the classroom. And I guess that was September, November, December, he started drinking and using. And by January, he was a real different kid. This happens sometimes with kids. Changes happen real fast. And instead of being responsive and perky and funny, he was withdrawn and sullen and a jerk. Now, he was just one of a long line of kids I was dealing with, but this was the one I remember, and I was just mad. And he came to class one day. It was 8:30 in the morning, first class, and I remember grabbing him, and I remember shaking him, And I said, you walk like a junkie, you talk like a junkie, you stink like a junkie, and I shoved him in his chair. And then I had, in California, we call these an out-of-the-body experience. Other areas call them spiritual awakenings, but I got a moment of clarity, and I looked down on the room. It's like I left my body, I went up to the corner, and I looked down, and I saw a room with a dozen 15-year-olds in it who were scared, and a 34-year-old man who was a lunatic. And the caption that ran across the screen was, Tom, if you were 15 years old and in trouble, would you go and talk to you? And the answer was absolutely not. Because of my rage, I was useless. And I was adding to the problem. I wasn't solving anything. I was no longer helpful. I didn't know what to do about this. I was involved in another program, and this really wasn't the topic for the other program. And a weekend or two or three later, I was with a whole group of folks in Riverside, California. It was a weekend retreat. And they had AA and Al-Anon there, and I listened to a man in Al-Anon talk about living with an alcoholic. And he said, in Al-Anon, I learned how to live with a crazy person and not go crazy. And I could hear that because I felt crazy. And I went back to Los Angeles, and I called my sponsor, and I said, I think I could use some Al-Anon. And he thought that was a good idea, too. He's also an adult child. And I started going to meetings, and the first, where's a good Al-Anon meeting? I have no idea. I know what's a good meeting for me, but I don't know what's a good meeting for you. You really have to do the footwork of knocking on a dozen different doors and walking in and sitting down and see what speaks to you. The suggestion I make is you got to go where you're fed, and you might have to go to half a dozen different places to find out who can feed you, where you're fed the right tone of voice, the right conversation, the right gathering of persons. But I didn't know anything. I just saw there was an Al-Anon meeting down the street from the school I taught at. So I went, and my first Al-Anon meeting was mostly women. There were a group of 5 men that sat in the back. I joined them. And all the women were around a table, and the way this meeting ran, they read the stuff. We read a lot of things in Al-Anon. We don't want to leave anything out in an Al-Anon meeting. So we read a lot of things. And then people would raise their hands, and they would announce a problem they were having. And the woman who was secretary of that meeting, and I think she'd been secretary for 300 or 400 years, proceeded to solve the problem. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Al-Anon, that's not our method. Our method is to share our experience, strength, and hope, and people get to make their own decisions. I mean, this is and it might take a long time to make those kinds of decisions. But here, this lady was running people's lives, which is crazy. Now, in her defense, she was smart. She also knew a lot. Those are two different things. And she was genuinely helpful and practical. But she was the czar. She was the queen. She was running things. I started going to meetings in a variety of places, and I made some good friends in Al-Anon. And one of my friends is a lady who came into Al-Anon full of rage and pride and arrogance, and didn't like the way Al-Anon did anything. And so she wrote her own suggestions and advice and her own literature. And she spoke very well, and she was very bright and perky. And so people said, "Oh, will you be my sponsor?" And she said, "Yes, and here's the manuscript." And then they went through their manuscript. She didn't see this as craziness. She saw this as being helpful. That fine line. So after a couple of years, she realized how crazy that was. And she also realized that the Al-Anon literature, for the most part, was wiser, better, more useful than her own hit on things. So her textbook became thinner and thinner and thinner. And then she said finally, after 8 or 12 years in Al-Anon, she only had 1 page of advice that she would give to people. And then she said, now, however, at 20 years of Al-Anon, I only give 1 piece of advice. And I said to her, what advice do you give your sponsees? And she says, I tell them, honey, call before you shoot. And of course, the alcoholic says, shoot whom? Who are you talking about? And because we could then start talking about something that I've always had a lot of difficulty with. Number one, it's minding other people's business. I really do like to run your life because you're not doing it well. And the other, when I'm not totally self-obsessed, I'd rather run your life. And the other is just the anger that I have to deal with on a pretty regular basis. I'm mad a lot. I mentioned that at meetings, and someone told me, well, if you were truly spiritual, you wouldn't be angry. And I thank them for their point of view. And I don't say, because I have a perfect Al-Anon program, that my anger will leave 10 minutes after your judgmentalism does. How's that? But because I have a perfect Al-Anon program, I don't say that out loud, usually. Unless we're on an airplane. So that one meeting, I went to that meeting off and on for a while, but I needed another meeting to get to. And the other meeting was a Saturday night meeting in downtown Los Angeles where the traditions were observed. In fact, they were strictly observed. And if anybody did something against the traditions, there were people who would yell at them. And I learned a lot that way. Somebody mentioned they joined a church and they just got yelled at. We don't talk about churches here. Well, I just wanted to give the address. We don't care. We don't talk about churches here. Or political things that come in. I mean, the traditions let us know that in terms of churches and religion and politics, we don't agree on any of this stuff. And so it's best not to talk about it. And I've learned, in my family we talked about it. We had a lot of squabbling over religion and politics, and we had bigotry. In my extended family, we've got Catholics and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Masons and Lutherans and Presbyterians. And most of the time we get along, but it sure didn't start that way. And there were some very hard things said by my mother's Swedish Lutheran family when she married an Irish Catholic, and there were family members that wouldn't speak to her for years. This was 1934. So since that time, things have healed a lot, and I'm for the let's work together. But anyway, I was emailing a friend of mine, and I mentioned a political figure. And I just mentioned, gently, I thought, discreetly. And I got this is someone who's a friend of mine in the program, and I got this 500-word flame message back where this is someone this person doesn't like at all. And he also is an Al-Anon member, and after he burned the words into the keys and sent it to me, his next email to me simply was, "You and I probably shouldn't talk about this." And I think that's the right choice. And I didn't. And I agree with him. We don't agree, and so let's focus on places we do agree. Anyway, I started coming to Al-Anon. And I come into Al-Anon as a teacher who's burned out and exhausted. And I started meeting all kinds of teachers who were burned out and exhausted. And I came into the fellowship not knowing how to deal with any kind of self-care, any kind of taking care of me, any kind of emotional thing. I was just a basket case. And I left teaching and I went into social work. And that was going from a difficult situation to an impossible situation. And I was in over my head a lot. And I suddenly found out that I was no longer attending Al-Anon. I was fighting to get to Al-Anon because I was surrounded by lunatics. And I don't want to react like a lunatic when I'm talking to a lunatic. I want to be able to pause. I want to be able to be a force for good. Instead of instant knee-jerk reaction, which is the way I live my life. Yesterday's workshop was on act, don't react, and I find that pretty helpful. My Blanche, out of Texas, said, in Al-Anon we learn how to keep our sails out of other people's wind. And I sure needed to hear that. Because I would get involved in all kinds of campaigns. I'm a campaigner. I go door to door. I pass out literature. I'm one of those folks. And I remember I was in recovery a little bit, and there was a presidential election campaign going on, and I thought I should bring literature to the meeting. Now, that's a bad idea. But I thought I was just being helpful because my candidate was surely the enlightened one and the others were all swine. So and then again, the tradition comes in. We don't talk about that kind of stuff at meetings because we don't agree on that kind of stuff. And then I had that moment of clarity again, and I realized what's important and what brings us together, and what's important and what brings us together. So I found in Al-Anon I needed to learn some stuff about self-care. I needed to learn some stuff about letting go. I needed to learn some stuff about don't hit back. I needed to learn some stuff about what's my business and what's not my business. And I would think that's my first 10 years in Al-Anon, learning real basic things like that. Someone in Southern California told me that each year in recovery gives us one more second of response time. And I have found this a helpful concept. Because I'm a responder. I'm a responder. You make the first move, I'll criticize. You make the first move, I'll join in. You make the first move, I'll send a donation. You make the first move, I'll shove back. But I really have a lot of please go first in my wiring. And that was part of survival. And I want some breathing room. So right now I've got about 10 seconds is a big deal. If you've got 10 seconds of response time, that's a couple of breaths. And I, on occasion, can just not say anything. And I think that's real recovery for me. I can also sometimes not do anything. And for me, that's real recovery. I heard we talk about alcoholism, the family disease, and I love that pamphlet that says Understanding Ourselves. where it talks about the family dynamics. And in end of June, I'm going to be doing a presentation before members of my community all over the United States and Canada on addiction and alcoholism. And I want to talk about the need for Al-Anon responses to things, or we just go along for the ride, and we're crazier than they are. So I love the description of alcoholism that says it's an allergy of the body and that it's an obsession of the mind. I like that. But I like other images too. I heard Dr. Gill in Marin County, who worked a lot with people getting well, people in recovery, families. Gill would say alcoholism is a disease that has 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 is the fun phase. This is when it's fun. It's followed by phase 2, which is fun plus problems. It's still fun, but you start to have problems. And phase 3 is just called problems. And the fun is over. Now, in dealing with the alcoholic, it's difficult because they're having fun. I was just new into Al-Anon, just in the door of Al-Anon, and there was a conference like this conference in Maui. It was in the East Bay. And I went, and I'm there, pretty new, pretty raw, no skills. The skin had not yet grown over my nerve endings at all. So I'm still a raw nerve, and I'm responding to anything that goes on. And they had the Al-Anon musical. And I said, what an amazing concept. I mean, what a shock. I mean, what would you call it? And anyway, they used Broadway show tunes, and they would sing songs, and they had a group of women and men singing at the Al-Anon musical, and I went to it, and I'm still I think I need Al-Anon a little tiny bit, maybe a couple times a year, because I'm surrounded by assholes, but basically, I really don't need that program all that much, and I'm just there to visit. And a young woman got up and sang, "It's 11:30 and the cops are here. I could use the rent to bail him out. Then he'll be so happy he'll give up his beer. But just in case, I think I'll pour it down the spout." And then the chorus broke into DENIAL, life goes on. La 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 la, life goes on. I did the same thing. I just laughed. I said, that's pretty good. And I sure don't identify with her. And then this young man got up and he sang, "Daddy's in the kitchen with a drunken face. Maybe it was something that I did. Brother Billy touched me in a funny place. It must be me. I'll try to be a better kid." And I burst into tears. Now, the laughter and the tears indicate something's going on. And I knew that there was some work that had to be done. And that the grief and the tears were all there. And I had never had a conversation about any family dynamic stuff other than sarcasm, ridicule, and fighting. And I went into Al-Anon more seriously. I also got outside help with a therapist. This was a therapist who ran the methadone clinic in Berkeley, so she was not an optimist. And we did stuff, and I said, I've got family stuff to talk about. And so I saw her twice a week for about 2 years, or more than 2 years. And she was very helpful to me. But I remember I ran in, the first time I went to see her, talk about me and this and that and this and that and this and that. And she listened and took a few notes. And the 50-minute hour is up. And I said, "Do you have any questions, doctor?" And she said, "Just one. Are you always this charming?" And I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "Charm. You learned that in an alcoholic home. You don't have to do that here." See you next week. And she was very helpful, and it was very painful. And it was with her was the first time I said out loud that my father was alcoholic. And it didn't feel good. It didn't feel liberating. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel free. I felt shame and embarrassment. And I mean, I could talk about my own alcoholism, but I can't talk about the family stuff. And she helped me walk through that, and meetings helped me walk through that. And the first couple of times I went to meetings, now I'm really going to meetings. I'm no longer observer status. I'm there. And I felt raw, just raw. And I had to learn a whole bunch of stuff about me and my reactions to stuff. And I had to take a look at that huge amount of rage and that huge amount of exhaustion. So I read more on alcoholism. I looked at family dynamics. I saw movies that talked about the theme. I listened to other people in recovery. And I learned a lot. I also heard someone describe alcoholism this way: allergy of the body, obsession of the mind, description number 1. This person said alcoholism is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. Which is an important thing to think about. Because early in the evening, the gorilla looks pretty cute. And you think you're just going to have a good time. They're wonderful dancers, and they're good company. And but if the gorilla has his arms around you, the gorilla's in charge, even if you're taller. The gorilla kills a lot of people. This is a killer disease, and I started noticing that when I was about 10 years in program. The women and men who were no longer here, the women and men who suicided, the women and men who overdosed, the women and men who casualties, high casualties. And I heard this person at a meeting say, if you're clean and sober today, it's a real good sign that the gorilla has let go. If the gorilla has let go, get out of the cage. And don't go back into the cage even when the gorilla starts humming your song. Well, I'm sure I'd never want to dance with that gorilla before. The last time was disgusting. Yeah, well, suddenly you hear music. Now, those of us who love alcoholics, we visit the zoo a lot. And we look at giraffes and we look at zebras. I was at a zoo not long ago, and I spent a while just watching the giraffes, and I don't want to sound judgmental, but I don't think the giraffes think about very much. They just kind of chew, you know. We get to the gorilla cage, and we look into the gorilla cage, and we see the person we love dancing with the gorilla. Might be our partner, it might be our mom or our dad or one of our kids, brother, sister, best friend. And we go crazy. Because we've seen this before. We've had the conversation. They promised. You know. And so we want to get into the cage. We want to start vacuuming. We want to polish the bars. We want to hang curtains. We want to prepare nice, nutritious meals. We're just trying to help, you know. And then if that doesn't stop the chaos, we try to get between the gorilla and the person we love. And the gorilla turns on us and yanks our arms and legs off. So we have a program too. And it's called Al-Anon. And a lot of the Al-Anon program comes down to stay out of the cage. But I just want to vacuum. We know. Yeah, we know. We all just want to vacuum. And who has time, you know? We're going to focus on some other things so we can get our lives back. Well, I have all these feelings. I know. We're going to talk about those over here. And we have our own craziness that we're going to deal with. And I found that to be a pretty helpful image. I can spot doomed, helpless, codependent behavior in others before I ever see it in myself. Family stuff, I'm better with my students. I was able to start setting some boundaries and being clearer when I started letting go of some of my manipulation stuff. I felt fear. If I'm not running things, what will happen to them? Again, I heard Blanche say this. There is one source, and that source is God. There are many channels that source uses. And the channels change all the time. In my fantasy life, I was the channel at that school for especially any kid in trouble. And the fact is, there were some kids I could connect with, and there were other kids I couldn't. And God uses lots of different channels, and I'm not in charge. But I found I was a worrier. I worried about kids. I could worry myself sick. And I learned this at home, I guess. My mom was a great worrier, and she thought that if she worried enough, her children would not fly off the planet. But if she stopped worrying, gravity would come to an end, and we would just fly off the planet. So the way we used to say, I love you, we would say, I'm worried sick about you. You know? I've been throwing up all night. We must be very close. And it would just make me crazy. And I don't worry for the most part now. When I find myself worrying, I see what I've got to do is a little ritual. And I have a God box. And in that box, I put stuff that belongs to God very officially. And there's some letters in there. There's some photographs in there. I just put a thing in there in the last month, something I'm worried about, and I put it in there. And I'm from a Catholic background, so we have a lit candle regularly by the God box. And I just turn this over to God's care, and I say, God, take care of this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to solve this problem. Before I did enough Al-Anon, when I would pray, I would tell God what to do. God, this person needs help. Would you please do something? You know? God, would you take care of this? As if God doesn't care, you know. So I was God's advisor. That's how close we were. Very close. I advise God, and then God does things, and we're very close. And I stopped doing that. And one of my Mormon sister-in-laws helped me on this a lot. When she prayed, and she has worrying in her family too, as a way of relating. I'm so worried about you. She would visualize God as light, and she would put the person she was worried about in the palms of her hands, and then she would hold them up in the light. And just not use any words or directions, just hold them in the light. And I find that helpful. I use that when I don't know what else to do. I do that. Family. So I started bringing my recovery into my own family, and what I did as a kid was I ran away. At my Al-Anon home group, there's 8 or 10 of us. Manly Men Stag in Albany, California. Most of us double winners. The meeting's too late. It's 8:15 to 9:15. I didn't go for a month because it was too late. I showed them, and then I started going again. I was sober, brand new sober, and it was around New Year's Eve, and someone said, "Is AA open on New Year's Eve?" Oh yeah, it's open. So a couple of years ago, it's a Monday night meeting. Christmas Day was a Monday. And one of the guys at this meeting said, "Will Al-Anon be open on Christmas Day?" Oh, oh yes, we'll be here, having just entertained our families. So at this meeting, at this Monday night meeting, I had to start learning how to deal with again, family stuff. That's what I want to talk about. And I didn't know a lot. But at this Monday night meeting, that was it. Bloop, connection. The guys talked about running away from home as kids, and some kids do that when the family is really crazy. And these little boys literally ran away from home at 5 and 8 and 12 years old, and they ran out the front door, and they wondered, which way is Mexico, which way is Canada, let's go. And I did not do that because I discovered books. And what I would do when it got awful is I would read. And I'm a reader to this day, and I read all the time. And sometimes it's for information, and sometimes it's for pleasure, and sometimes it's for high anxiety. If I have enough books, I'm not anxious. If I don't have books, I'm anxious. And I usually don't think I'm anxious because I have books. But watch me if I forget the books. So family stuff, I didn't want to be part of. I wanted to get out of there, and going into the Jesuit community helped me get away. And I liked living about 500 to 1,000 miles away, and I didn't like contact with the family. And we would gather for holidays, and I just found them awful. And I could show up and be polite. That's one of my first charm. I've mentioned charm, but polite's also a pretty good way for me to react to you being a jerk. And I'll be polite and polite and polite and friendly and friendly and friendly, way beyond the barriers. And then I leave, and I'm full of rage, and I hate you, and I'd like to kill you. And this would all be in the course of an hour or 3. And I didn't know, and again, I told the therapist, I said, well, I don't think I'm angry. I don't think I'm angry at all. I'm such a friendly fellow. And she said to me, the next time you're in a social situation, family situation, and you find yourself extremely charming, step back and see what's going on. And I found that I used charm as a way of covering the rage and the anger that I had. And I didn't know how to deal with my family at all. So I got a clue from an Al-Anon member. I have nephews and nieces, and I knew them when they were little kids, but now they were grown-ups. I mean, they were grown-ups, and I didn't know them because I'd only meet them in large groups. And when the family is all together, it's a force much greater than I am, and I'm not in charge of any of it, and I can't break through the crap because it's already going. It's been going for years. I'm the youngest. I mean, so I would just hate the group, and I would feel like I was squeezed and used and on the roller coaster and had to be phony and lie and leave in a rage. I know none of you relate to that. So I decided for Christmas one year as a Christmas gift, I would invite my nieces and nephews out one by one for lunch or dinner, their choice. Just, the one and me, so we could have a conversation. My Christmas gift to you, let's have lunch or dinner on me at a place of your choosing. Not too expensive. And I went out with one of my nieces, the middle niece of my oldest brother, who's a drunk. And she's a very bright girl who has a few food issues, a few control issues. And we've always been very polite and charming to each other with great big smiles. And we went to a Russian vegetarian restaurant in Berkeley. And we sat down. And I've been in Al-Anon for a while now, so I'm not trying to manipulate everything. We're going to have a simple meal, and I don't know what's going to happen. And she, after a few moments, her whole demeanor changed. Because I was no longer playing, friendly uncle role. I just wanted to be a human being with her. And she kind of hunched down a little bit, and she looked at me and she said, Tom, are my parents crazy? And I said to her, you can talk about your parents if I can talk about my parents. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the difficulties I had with family stuff. And my own mom and dad I found overwhelming. And I tried to change them time and time and time and time again. And I would be so angry at them. And I wouldn't know how to talk to them. So I'd play them. In the Al-Anon book, the little gray book with the blue cover, I'm not good on names. It says you want to watch out for the 4 M's. This, I think, is on its discussion on the 4th step. And it says you want to watch managing, manipulating, martyrdom, and mothering. And that was a lot of my stuff with my folks. And I always tried to... I had a love-hate thing going that wore me out and exhausted me. And slowly it changed. I did a lot of work in Al-Anon and a little bit of therapy, and I found that I could be with my father. And it wasn't easy, but I could be with my father. And he and I agreed on nothing. And by the time I came along, he was exhausted, and I always tried to perk him up so he'd talk to me, and that was just hard to do. And by the time he reached his 70s and 80s, the alcoholism was pretty strong, and there wasn't a lot of person left. And I had to come to terms with that, and I had to feel grief over that. There was this very alive fellow who had been chewed up by the drinking over many, many years. And I could not hate him and not fight him and just be with him. He got diagnosed with cancer, and he's 92, so he's had a long life. And I spent the nights with him. My other brothers are married with kids, so I would go and sleep with my dad in the hospital, and I'd get there about 11 p.m., and I'd stay until my mom came for lunch the next day, and it was close to the end, and I was home. This worked just fine, and I got a chance to rub his feet, and I got a chance to hold his hand, and I also knew I really didn't like him very much. He was not someone that I had, 50 years of life coexisting with this man, but it had been very, very difficult. But I could be respectful and I could be gentle, and I was very glad to choose to be there. And I wasn't there out of guilt or remorse or humiliation. It's because I really wanted to be with this older man who gave me life. Anyway, he got diagnosed as terminal, and my mom came the next day at 11 for lunch, and they served lunch, and it was some kind of beef thing, maybe close to beef, and a soupy thing, and ice cream. And my dad reached for the ice cream. He didn't have words, but he wasn't a chatty guy, but he ice cream. And my mom said to him, "Soup first." And I think I had 20 seconds of response time. And what I wanted to do was very clear to me, because I'm not shut down most of the time. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, "He's dying. Can't you let him have ice cream once?" But I have this perfect Al-Anon program that I keep mentioning, and what I did, I just saw the control and the crazy, and I saw 60 years of. But I was able to say this, and it's a phrase I've learned in Al-Anon, and I'm very grateful for it. And the phrase is simply this: when I'm faced with an impossible situation, and I might explode or implode at any moment, I can say, "I'll be right back." And that's what I did. I said, "I'll be right back." And I went out to the hall. If I had had a cigar, I would have inhaled it and eaten it. And I was enraged, pacing back and forth, and very upset because, years of therapy were about stuff like that. And but what was clear to me as part of Al-Anon was, this is not my deal. This is their deal. They worked this out long before I came along. And this is none of my business. He's dying and she's losing a partner of many, many years, and I do not want to make it worse by creating a little tiny drama in the emergency room. So I paced back and forth, and then when I was calmed down, I went back in and I said, "I'll be back tonight." And, life went on. Family funerals are big deals, and I was able to preside at my father's funeral, which I knew was going to be happening, but I didn't have any words I didn't want to preach. So I asked a friend of his to do that, and he did, and it went very well. And the funeral was very respectful and gentle, and it was an honor to do that. Thank you, Al-Anon. I never would have been able to do that without a lot of time, letting go, turning over, accepting, letting go, turning over, accepting. I get in traps, and one of the traps I get into, I mentioned it when I first started in dealing with my students. I want to be helpful, and then I feel I'm taken advantage of, and then I get mad. So a few years later, my mom now is in independent living, and it's Christmas Eve morning. And I would get a couple of my friends together, and I'd go to where my mom lived and do Mass. We'd have a Christmas Eve Mass, and these were all elderly people, and it was service. And then we'd go to my middle brother's house for dinner, and then bring my mom back. So we did that for a couple of years. So we had a routine, and it worked. And I wanted to be helpful and respectful. And it's the holidays. And I've long, when I'm suicidal, it's usually over the holidays. Right after a big family gathering. Let's jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And so it's trauma time for a lot of us. Anyway, I called my mom that morning, and I just said to her, hi, it's Tom, and I'll be there tonight. Now, she's 94, 95 years old. I'll be there tonight, and we'll have Mass, and then we'll have a nice evening at Paul's house, my boring, non-alcoholic, depressed brother Paul. We'll have a nice time at his house. And she said to me, and I'm like 55 years old, she said, what are you going to wear? Now, one of the deals between me and my mom is there were tones of voice. And suddenly, I'm 9 years old and mad. But I have a perfect Al-Anon program, and I had a little bit of recovery, and I breathed in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And then I said, what I'm going to wear is not important, and I don't like... I was going to do one. When you say that, it really makes me feel weird, and we've talked about this for 40 years, and I think by now it should be resolved. And because she's always afraid I'm going to come looking like a hippie, which I have done on a lot of occasion. And for about 15 or 20 years, socks were an issue that got discussed regularly, whether I'd wear them or not. And then, of course, I couldn't wear them. I would rather be dead than wear socks if my mother wanted socks to be worn. I mean, I'm a very deep person. It's this reaction stuff, So anyway, then she repeated. Then she said, I don't want you to embarrass me in front of these people. I was at a meeting in Southeast Asia a few years ago, and a woman talked about being angry. She was a British woman, and she said, I was incandescent. And that's exactly... I mean, I could have lit the whole room with my fury. And with 20-plus years of sobriety and 20-plus years of Al-Anon and a Catholic priest for 25 years and a meditator with an 11-step practice and, all this stuff, I hung up on my mother on Christmas Eve, who was 96 years old. And what did Al-Anon tell me? Well, I know what I'm feeling. Now, there were years I didn't know what I was feeling. And I just felt but it was the most honest thing I could do, and I just felt furious. Hung up. And then, of course, she calls back right away. Answering machine. Thank God for answering machines. I screen my calls. I think God uses an answering machine. I'm sure God screens his calls. Don't hang up on your mother on Christmas Eve. And I knew, Al-Anon gives me tools. I knew I needed to do a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to be in feelings for a while, and I should take a walk. I should get outside. I should dig something. I should chop something. I should plant something. I should knock something down. I should do something. But get for a 5-mile walk. And then I knew I needed to call a couple of people to just say, this is what happened. Call my sponsor, check in with a few folks, say a few things out. And then when I was calm, return the call. And it took about 3 or 4 hours. It used to take 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 hours. And I went back, and she was at the hairdresser, so I knew it was safe. And I talked to her machine, and I simply said, I apologize for hanging up. I did not go on to say why I hung up. And for 40 years now, we've been talking about how I dress. I left all of that out. Thank you, Al-Anon. Apologize. 10th step. I apologize for hanging up. I'll see you tonight. We'll have a good time. And I'm not going to react as a 9-year-old boy who's mad at his mom. Because I don't have to do that today. Thank you, Al-Anon. Thank you, Al-Anon. Thank you, Al-Anon. And I also learned I could have honest conversations with people about this. With both of my brothers, we don't have a lot of interaction, but we have some, and we try to talk honestly about real things now. And with my nephews and nieces, we can have honest conversations about real things now. But what I have to bring to it is a desire to tell the truth, and a desire to connect people, and a desire to not be a jerk. Because I spent years being a jerk. And I don't want to do that. I think in Al-Anon, with Blanche, again, my great Al-Anon mentor, Blanche, I heard her, I didn't meet her for years. Someone gave me a tape of hers. And I listened to it over and over and over and over and over again, like we do with some tapes. And she was out of Texas, and she grew up in Florida, I guess, and she had one of these very, very thick, clear Southern accents. And I was asked to come to speak at a conference in Houston, Texas, and I got there, and they had the speakers at the table, and there were all of these folks. I didn't know anybody, and one of the women was there, and she looked at me, and she just said, "Hi, my name is Blanche." And I threw myself at her feet. A little too dramatic, perhaps. And I just said, "I have loved you for years." She saved my life on more than one occasion just by telling the truth simply. And telling us babies are dependent. Babies need, and if their needs aren't met, they sicken and die. Adolescents are independent. Give me land, lots of land with the starry skies above. Grown-ups are interdependent. And as grown-ups, what we learn to do is go my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. And one of my problems as I began dealing with Al-Anon is a couple things that were very clear to me, my impoverished life. If I was your teacher, we had a relationship. If you were my teacher, we had a relationship. If you could help me, we had a relationship. If I could help you, we had a relationship. But I had no peers. I had no friends. And I remember, I said, where do you meet people to be friends with? And I remember talking to my sponsor, how do you make friends in the program? And he said, say hello to everybody. Some will say hello back. And then you get to decide if you want to say hello back to them. And over time you build friendships and relationships, and you find allies. And I started doing that with great concentration and focus after several years in Al-Anon. How to simply have friends, not clients, not advisors, but just people to hang out with. And it's one of the great benefits of the program for me right now is there's a lot of people in my life that I don't have to fix or advise or do things for, but I can choose to. I can choose to. I don't have to. And it goes back and forth. Also, a big thing of Al-Anon help for me is I've been able to ask for help on occasion. when I've been overwhelmed or felt crazy or I don't know what to do, I can ask. And that does not come easily. That I have to work up to that. In my backyard, there's an eyesore that's been there for years. And I have not known how to ask for help to repair that eyesore. And I have been planning on doing it for 8 or 10 years. And last week I asked for help. And someone showed up and is being taken care of as we speak. I mean, I'm quite amazed. But I find it hard to ask for help sometimes. And with the God stuff, I ask God for help on a pretty regular basis. In the morning, be with me, give me enough faith, give me enough hope, give me enough charity for today. I really do believe in this day at a time program thing because every day is different in my world. And I can be fooled and blinded and manipulated, and I just don't want to be doing that with people, and I don't like it when it happens to me. I want to say a few simple things on the third step, and then I'm done. Turning things over. There's a third step prayer, which I don't use very much. And that's because it's King Jamesy, and I just don't. I mean, this seems trivial to you, but for me it's a matter of high principle. I just don't use Shakespeare to pray. I mean, thou and dust and unto for, and I just don't do it. I prefer more of a Quaker, direct prayer. So I asked, what does it look like if you're doing a third step? And my sponsor told me this. He said, if you're doing a third step, you're showing up regularly. Show up. Showing up is an important part of turning things over. Get out of your head, get out of your room, get out of your way. Show up. Get to a meeting, get to work, get to the appointment. Show up. Number 2, pay attention. Once I've shown up, I want to be looking at the smells and the sights and the flavors and the tastes and the touches. I mean, what's going on? I miss a lot because I'm so busy in my head. Show up, pay attention. Tell the truth. Talk about what's going on. I'm feeling fear. I'm feeling hope. I'm feeling angry. Let go of the results. Let go of the outcome. My job, the footwork, is to show up, pay attention, tell the truth, do the footwork, make the phone call, fill out the form, get that stuff done. It's not interesting and it's not glamorous and it's footwork and a lot of it's boring. Do it anyway. And I'm not in charge of the outcome. I have to let go of that. But I sure get to participate in this business of being people. I asked my sponsor on one of his good days, I said, this God's will stuff, what does God's will look like? Big topic. He said, it is God's will for each of us to have a life. Go get one. Which means we try a lot of things and see what fits and what doesn't fit, and some things work and some things don't work, and some things don't work anymore, and sometimes I need to develop a whole bunch of new skills. One of the Al-Anon understandings I had, I've looked at hermit crabs. They're not pretty, but they're delicious for a lot of birds. And hermit crabs need a great big shell covering them, and it protects them. It gives them a place to live. It gives them safety. They can eat there. They can play around. They can do stuff. But then they get big and big and big, and the shell's too small. And I've had that experience in recovery. All of a sudden, everything's cramped and squeezed, and there's no room, and I can't breathe. So you have to find a bigger shell. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have to leave the one you're in. You're absolutely vulnerable, and you have to see what fits. You have to find a place where there's room to grow and live and breathe. And I think in the last 30 years or so, that's happened to me on several different occasions. And it's always a crisis, and it's always difficult, and it's always hard. And I never think I'm going to survive a situation like that. But I need to pay attention when I start feeling squeezed and cramped. And I need to pay attention when I start needing it's time for a change. And it's time for room. And I get to make some choices and decisions. I was ordained a priest in 1978, and my first job was in an impossible parish with major craziness, ideal for an Al-Anon with no program. Downtown Hollywood, there's guns and drugs and prostitution and homeless people and crises and lunatics. To save money, they went to the state institutions and they found out there were a lot of people there who would function just fine if they took their pill. So what we're going to do is let them out, and we're going to encourage them all to take their pills. And so they did this. They did this, by the way. And with a lot of people who are manic depressive and schizophrenic, they forget to take their pill. So they start acting out, and it's our first homeless population. And there was a big fellow that lived in the parking lot of the church who thought he was the Archangel Michael. And he was usually nonviolent, but every so often, he had to fight the devil, and you just hoped it wasn't you. Overwhelming. And the telephone rang all day long, and there's crisis and people. It was an extremely busy place, and I have no boundaries. I have no Al-Anon yet. I don't know anything about saying no. I don't know anything about saying I need the day off. I don't know anything about taking a nap. I don't know anything about talking. I thought, try harder, work harder, go faster. Which gets me to Al-Anon. So I went to a meeting. And the meeting, 12-step program, recovery program, and there were problem solvers there. Men's stag. Problem-solving men's stags meetings. We don't deal with things, we solve them. And my problem, I said I have a new job, and I'm overwhelmed, and I feel inadequate, and I feel incompetent, and I don't know what to do. And a guy there, his name was Chuck, and he was 6 feet tall, and he weighed a pound. And Chuck said, "Have you done this kind of work before?" I said, "Never." He said, "Well, then you probably are incompetent and overwhelmed." And it's so helpful when the truth is told, And he said, no one knows how to do new jobs, and you have to ask. Find people who've been doing it and talk to them. And this is one of the things I've learned in Al-Anon over the years. When I'm faced with situations that are complicated and I don't know what to do next, talk to people who've been there before. I find in Al-Anon, people married to alcoholics can talk to people married to alcoholics. But I don't get that. I've seen the movie, but I don't get married to alcoholics. Adult children can talk to adult children. We get it. I know. The new people coming into Al-Anon are the people whose children are acting out as alcoholics or drug addicts. And the children might be 16 or 36. But if one of your kids is the one who's your qualifier, you live in a level of terror and rage that no one else can understand but another mom or dad who's terrified. And so you got to find another mom and dad and talk to the other mom and dad, because they'll get it. And then we share our experience, strength, and hope. My family stuff, is very mild in comparison to other people's family stuff. I found it was all I could do to cope with it and try to approach it with some kind of integrity and life. And I still get baffled by my family. There's wheels within wheels within wheels, and I get blindsided by stuff. I get confused by stuff. My brothers squabble, and they it's like they're still kids, and I don't play. I won't squabble with them. At my father's funeral, we were all three of us in the sacristy, and I was ready to get out and process. They were each going to be doing a reading, and they started squabbling. One of them likes Mr. Bush. One of them doesn't like Mr. Bush. You know, it's real deep stuff, you know, so there could be fist fights over this, and people shoved downstairs. So as they started this stuff, I used my teacher voice, and I just said, "Not now!" And they just suddenly were adults again, and we went through it. But I find family baffling, and I sometimes have no idea what to do with my family. And I have to ask people who have family, how do we deal with these things? How do we deal with these things? And I'm so grateful when someone shares with me their experience, strength, and hope, because it sure helps me. My current suggestion that I make to a lot of my sponsees is just get more sleep. Get more sleep. I got through the holidays pretty well this year because I was sleeping 9 and 10 hours a night. And I was suddenly not overwhelmed constantly. And so I think sleep helps. And I try to eat regularly, and I try to get a little bit of exercise, and I try to get to a meeting even if I don't like anybody in the room because they're jerks. Because I need the chemotherapy. And last point on third step and turning it over. This isn't new with me. I read this from a French priest from the 1600s, and he simply said, if you find it difficult or impossible to turn over everything to God's care, or turn over all of today to God's care, just turn over now. And then turn over now. And throughout the day, turn over now. And that works just fine. And when I can remember that, my day is pretty simple. And when I don't do that, I start getting angry and anxious and manipulative and exhausted. And I don't know what to do. And then I have to realize what I need to do is the footwork and make a connection with the fellowship. And Al-Anon has saved my life. And I'm very grateful for it. It's the quality of my life that is different today because of Al-Anon. The quality of my life. Because I've got one. And before I got to you, I didn't. I had drama. Lots of drama. And I'm a little suspicious about drama these days. I think that if there's a lot of drama going on, it takes the place of the love that used to be there. If there's a lot of drama going on, it's to stop action. It's to stop real things being said or done. So I don't want drama, and I try to stay away from the dramatic. And I think the truth is simple and obvious and straightforward, and that's where I want to spend my time. Thanks.